She delivered flowers to the Penthouse, but he asked a question that changed her life forever. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The elevator doors opened with a tired sigh, just like Denise felt most afternoons. She stepped into the hallway of the 42nd floor, her arms cradling a bouquet of white peonies mixed with eucalyptus branches. The flowers smelled like hope, something she'd been running low on lately. Her golden-tipped curls caught the artificial light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment, she paused to look out at Brooklyn spreading below like a patchwork quilt of dreams and broken promises. Apartment 4207. The address on her delivery app glowed on her phone screen, right next to the customer note. For someone special, thank you. Denise adjusted her floral sundress and knocked twice. She'd delivered thousands of bouquets over the past 3 years since opening her small floriculture business, but something about this delivery felt different. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light hit the hallway, or maybe it was just her Virgo intuition acting up again. The door opened and time seemed to slow down. A man stood there, tall, lean, with messy chestnut hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. His grey eyes held the kind of tiredness that came from thinking too much, not sleeping too little. He was barefoot, wearing a simple white t-shirt and grey sweatpants. Behind him, she could glimpse a cozy apartment with books stacked everywhere and a tabby cat perched on a windowsill. "The peonies," she said, extending the bouquet. "For James Walker." He nodded, but instead of taking the flowers, he tilted his head slightly and studied her face with curious intensity. Not in a creepy way, more like someone trying to solve a puzzle they'd been working on for years. "You're the florist," he said. It wasn't a question. "Denise Carter, from Petals and Purpose." She lifted the bouquet again, but he still didn't take it. Instead, James leaned against the doorframe and asked something that made her heart skip several beats. "Do you believe two people can find each other again before they've ever really met?" The question hung in the air between them like morning mist. Denise felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter she hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't the usual small talk about flower meanings or delivery instructions. This was something else entirely. She started, then stopped. Her therapist always told her to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of rushing to fill silence. But this felt different, sacred almost. James must have noticed her hesitation, because he stepped back slightly. "I'm sorry. That was weird. I've been alone with my cat for too long." He gestured toward the tabby, who was now watching them with golden eyes. "That's Otis. He's a better conversationalist than I am, apparently." Denise found herself smiling, a real smile, not the polite customer service one she'd perfected. "Actually, that's not weird at all. I think about that sometimes. About connections that feel familiar even when they're brand new." Their eyes met again, and she felt that flutter turn into something warmer. "The flowers are beautiful," James said, finally accepting the bouquet. His fingers brushed hers briefly during the exchange, and she noticed he had small scars on his knuckles, artist's hands. "How much do I owe you?" "It's already paid through the app," Denise replied, but neither of them moved to end the interaction. "Would you like some coffee?" The words tumbled out of his mouth like they surprised him. "I mean, if you're not rushing to another delivery, I make really good coffee. It's literally the only domestic skill I've mastered since becoming a hermit." Denise glanced at her phone. She had 2 more deliveries scheduled, but something about this moment felt important. Her logical Virgo mind whispered warnings about stranger danger and disrupted schedules, but her heart, the part of her she'd been ignoring for too long, whispered something else entirely. "I have 20 minutes, she heard herself say. James's face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. 20 minutes, I can work with that." As she followed him into his apartment, Denise caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her dark eyes looked brighter than they had in weeks, and there was color in her cheeks that had nothing to do with her usual bronzer. She touched the delicate gold necklace at her throat, a gift from her grandmother that she wore for protection and courage. Something told her she was going to need both. The apartment smelled like coffee beans and old books, with undertones of cat and something distinctly masculine, but not overwhelming. James moved around his small kitchen with surprising grace, and Denise found herself studying the way his hands worked, careful, deliberate, artistic. "So," she said, settling onto his couch next to a stack of illustrated book covers, "what made you ask that question? About people finding each other again?" James paused in his coffee preparation, and looked at her over his shoulder. Honestly, the moment I saw you, I felt like I'd been waiting for you to knock on my door, not just today, for a long time. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. And Denise realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about her anxiety medication, her unpaid invoices, or her carefully constructed walls. She was thinking about possibilities. The coffee was perfect, rich, smooth, with just enough bitterness to ground her racing thoughts. Denise wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep through her palms as she studied James's living room. Books were everywhere, stacked on the floor, scattered across the coffee table, bookmarked and dog-eared like old friends. She spotted titles ranging from graphic novels to poetry collections, with a hefty dose of design books mixed in. "You're an artist," she said, nodding toward a drafting table covered in pencil sketches and digital tablets. "Illustrator," James corrected, settling into the chair across from her with his own mug. "Book covers, mostly. I work with small publishers who still believe in the magic of actual storytelling." He took a sip and studied her face. "What about you? Besides making the city more beautiful with flowers, I mean." Denise felt that familiar flutter again. When was the last time someone had asked about her beyond her business? "I used to want to be a therapist. Spent 2 years in graduate school before I realized I was trying to fix everyone else's emotional wounds to avoid dealing with my own." The admission surprised her. She hadn't shared that detail with anyone except her actual therapist and Linny. James leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes focused entirely on her. "What changed your mind? About therapy, I mean." "My anxiety got so bad I could barely function in the program. Panic attacks during practicum sessions, insomnia, the works." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "Turns out you can't pour from an empty cup, even if you're really good at understanding why the cup is empty in the first place." "And flowers filled it back up." Denise considered this. "Flowers don't judge you for having bad days. They don't expect you to be strong all the time. They just exist beautifully. Even when they're dying, there's something honest about it." James was quiet for a moment, and she worried she'd overshared. But when he spoke, his voice was soft and understanding. "I had a breakdown 18 months ago," he said. "Complete burnout. I was working for this massive design agency, pulling 80-hour weeks, living on energy drinks and imposter syndrome. One day I just couldn't anymore. Ended up in the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. Turns out it was just my body's way of saying enough." Otis the cat jumped onto the couch beside Denise, as if sensing the weight of the conversation. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for the distraction. "Is that when you became a hermit?" she asked gently. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah. Deleted all my social media, quit the agency, stopped dating, figured if I couldn't handle my own life, I had no business dragging anyone else into it. And now? Now I illustrate stories about other people's adventures from the safety of my apartment." He gestured around the room. "It's not exactly heroic, but it's honest." Denise felt something shift between them, a recognition maybe. Two people who'd learned to be careful with their hearts, sitting in afternoon light, sharing truths they usually kept buried. Her phone buzzed with a delivery notification. 23 minutes had somehow turned into 45. "I should go," she said, but didn't move to get up. "Should you?" James asked. "Or do you just think you should?" The question hit deeper than it should have. How many times had she cut good moments short because of schedules, obligations, the endless list of shoulds that governed her days? "My next delivery is in Williamsburg," she said slowly. "Mrs. Patterson always tips well, and she's been waiting for her anniversary roses. But I haven't had a conversation like this in months." The admission felt dangerous and liberating at the same time. James stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city below. "I ordered those flowers for someone special, you know." Denise's heart did something complicated. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a girlfriend." "I don't." He turned to face her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I ordered them for whoever would deliver them. Sounds crazy, right? But I've been thinking about taking chances again, about opening my door to possibility." Literally. The weight of his confession settled between them like a secret. "That's either very romantic or mildly stalkerish," Denise said, but she was smiling. "I was going for romantic. Did I miss the mark? Jury's still out." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "But I should really go. Mrs. Patterson gets cranky when deliveries are late, and cranky customers leave bad reviews." James nodded, walking her to the door. "Would it be okay if I ordered more flowers sometime? I mean, legitimately this time. No ulterior motives beyond seeing you again." Denise paused with her hand on the doorknob. Every rational part of her brain screamed warnings about getting involved with customers, about disrupting her carefully controlled routine, about the dozen ways this could complicate her life. But her heart, traitorous, hopeful thing, was already answering. What kind of flowers? Whatever you think would look good in a space that's learning to be less lonely. The simplicity of it, the quiet honesty, undid something inside her. I know just the ones, she said. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Denise caught her reflection again. This time she looked like someone who'd just remembered what it felt like to be seen. Her phone buzzed with another delivery notification, but for once she didn't immediately calculate routes and time frames. Instead, she found herself wondering what James was doing right now, and whether he was thinking about her too. Girl, you're glowing, and it's freaking me out. Linny's voice cut through the morning silence of petals and purpose, like a knife through butter. She stood in the doorway of the small flower shop, her fire-engine red hair catching the early sunlight streaming through the windows. At barely 5'5", she somehow managed to command attention, like a force of nature in combat boots and ripped jeans. Denise looked up from the roses she was arranging, her hands stilling among the thorns. Good morning to you too, Linny. Don't good morning me. Linny dropped her vintage leather messenger bag behind the counter and fixed Denise with the kind of stare that had made grown men confess their deepest secrets. You've been humming, actual humming, like some Disney princess who just discovered woodland creatures can do her laundry. I hum sometimes. Honey, you grunt, you sigh, you occasionally make that little noise that sounds like a deflating balloon when you're stressed. But you do not hum. Linny crossed her arms, her collection of silver bracelets jangling. Spill. Denise tried to focus on the roses, but Linny's laser focus was impossible to ignore. They'd been friends since college, business partners for 3 years, and Linny could read her like a book written in large print. I met someone yesterday. Met someone where? The grocery store. The pharmacy. Please tell me it wasn't at Dr. Morrison's office, because dating your therapist is a customer. Denise's hands moved automatically, trimming stems and arranging petals. He ordered flowers for delivery to his apartment. Linny's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. And we talked. That's it? You talked? Denise, honey, you talk to customers all the time. That's literally part of running a business. Denise set down her scissors and finally looked at her best friend. He asked me if I believed two people could find each other again before they'd ever really met. The shop went quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the speakers and the distant hum of traffic on Atlantic Avenue. Linny's expression shifted from playful interrogation to something softer. Oh, she said. Oh, that's actually kind of beautiful, right? Denise felt that flutter again, just thinking about James's grey eyes and the way he'd leaned against his doorframe like he had all the time in the world. And then he invited me for coffee, and we just connected, really connected. Linny perched on the edge of the counter, her expression growing more serious. What's his name? James Walker. He's an illustrator, lives in that new building on Fulton Street. Age? 38, I think. Kids? Ex-wife? Criminal record? Linny? Mental health status? Employment history? Views on commitment? Jesus, you sound like you're vetting him for a security clearance. Linny's face softened, but her voice stayed firm. D, you know I love you. You know I want you to be happy. But you also know your pattern. The words hit like cold water. Denise turned back to her roses, her movements becoming more aggressive. I don't have a pattern. You absolutely have a pattern. You meet someone who seems different, who says the right things, who makes you feel special and understood. You dive in head first because you're generous and hopeful and because you want to believe in love. And then they leave because I'm too much work. The words came out harder than she intended. No, Linny's voice was gentle now. And then you make yourself smaller and smaller trying to be what you think they want, until there's nothing left of you but anxiety and resentment. Denise's hands stilled among the flowers. The truth of it sat heavy in her chest. This is different, she said quietly. How? He told me about his breakdown, his anxiety. He didn't try to fix me or give me advice about managing my stress. He just listened. Linny was quiet for a long moment, and when Denise looked up, her friend's expression had shifted to something thoughtful. Okay, Linny said finally, but we're doing this smart this time. No grand gestures, no moving too fast, no losing yourself in someone else's story. He hasn't even asked me out officially. Yet? Linny grinned, and some of her usual mischief returned. But he will, and when he does, we're going to make sure you remember who you are in the process. The door chime rang, and both women looked up as their first customer of the day walked in, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "I need flowers," he announced. "Emergency flowers. My wife found out I missed our daughter's school play because I was in a meeting, and I need flowers that say, 'I'm sorry I'm a terrible father,' but in a more elegant way." Linny and Denise exchanged a look. "We've got you covered," Denise said, falling back into professional mode. But as she walked the customer through their selection of apology arrangements, she found herself thinking about James's quiet confession in his sunlit apartment. Some men bought flowers to fix their mistakes. Others bought them to create possibilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for the coffee conversation yesterday. I haven't stopped thinking about what you said about flowers being honest, even when they're dying. James." Denise felt her heart do that complicated dance again, even as Linny's warning echoed in her mind. Maybe this time could be different. Maybe this time she could stay whole while falling. Denise stared at her phone for 17 minutes before typing back. She'd written and deleted at least 8 different responses, each one feeling either too eager, too casual, or too much like she was trying to be someone she wasn't. Finally, she settled on something honest. "Flowers don't lie, neither do good conversations. Thank you for yesterday." His response came back within minutes. "Would you like to have another one? Conversation, I mean. There's a small cafe near Prospect Park that makes terrible coffee, but has excellent people watching." She found herself smiling despite Linny's warning still echoing in her head. "When?" she typed. "Now? If you're free. I know it's spontaneous, and I know you probably have deliveries." Denise looked around the shop. It was Thursday afternoon, typically their slowest time. Linny was handling the books in the back office, and they only had 3 more deliveries scheduled, all within a few blocks of... "Linny!" she called toward the back office. "Yeah?" came the muffled reply. "Can you handle the afternoon deliveries? I might have an appointment." Linny's head popped around the corner like a jack-in-the-box, red hair wild with curiosity. "What kind of appointment?" "The coffee kind. With book cover guy. His name is James." "With James, then." Linny's expression was equal parts excitement and concern. "Just remember what we talked about, okay? Stay yourself." 30 minutes later, Denise found herself walking into Grind Coffee, a tiny hole-in-the-wall place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. James was right about the coffee. It smelled burnt from the doorway. But he was also right about the people watching. The cafe was filled with an eclectic mix of artists, students, and neighborhood regulars who looked like they had stories to tell. James sat at a corner table near the window, sketching in a small notebook. He looked up when she approached, and that same warm recognition from yesterday lit up his features. "You came," he said, standing to greet her. "You said terrible coffee. How could I resist?" They ordered. She got tea instead of coffee. He got something that looked suspiciously like motor oil and settled back at his table. Through the window, she could watch people hurrying past with their afternoon purpose. A mother pushing a stroller while talking on her phone, an elderly man feeding pigeons despite the "Do Not Feed Birds" sign, teenagers in school uniforms sharing earbuds and secrets. "What were you drawing?" Denise asked, nodding toward his notebook. James flipped it around so she could see. It was a sketch of the cafe, not just the physical space, but the feeling of it. He'd captured the way light filtered through dirty windows, the comfortable chaos of mismatched furniture, the sense that this was a place where people came to be alone together. "I'm working on a book cover for a collection of urban poetry," he explained. "The author wants something that captures the beauty in everyday moments, the magic hiding in ordinary spaces." Denise studied the sketch, noting the careful attention to detail, the way he'd made even the burnt coffee and worn linoleum look somehow romantic. "This is beautiful. You really see things, don't you?" "I try to. It's part of the job, I guess. Looking for the story underneath the surface." He paused, his grey eyes finding hers. "What about you? What do you see when you look around here?" Denise let her gaze wander around the cafe, really looking this time instead of just observing. "I see people trying to connect. The barista who remembers everyone's order. That's her way of saying you matter. The guy in the corner reading poetry out loud to himself. He's practicing for someone he wants to impress. The couple by the door who aren't talking, but keep touching hands. They're saying everything without words." James was quiet for a moment, and when she looked back at him, he was staring at her with something that might have been wonder. "See, you get it. Most people look but don't really see. Occupational hazard of therapy school, I guess, even though I didn't finish." "Why didn't you? Really, I mean, beyond the anxiety." The question was gentle, but it still made her chest tighten. She wrapped her hands around her tea mug, letting the warmth ground her, because I realized I was trying to become someone who could fix everything, including myself. But some things don't need fixing. They just need accepting. Like anxiety, like being the kind of person who feels everything deeply, like needing time to process emotions instead of just pushing through them, like, she paused, surprised by her own honesty, like wanting to be loved for who I am when I'm struggling, not just when I'm strong. James reached across the table and covered one of her hands with his. The touch was warm, careful, completely present. "That sounds like the most reasonable thing anyone's ever wanted," he said quietly. They sat like that for a moment, her hand under his, watching people live their lives through the cafe window. It should have felt awkward or too intimate for a second meeting, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Can I ask you something?" Denise said. "Anything. Yesterday, when you asked about people finding each other again, what did you mean?" James was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. "I've been thinking about this idea that maybe we meet certain people at exactly the right time, when we're ready to see them clearly. Not when we're desperate or trying to fill a void, but when we're whole enough to appreciate what they bring without needing them to complete us." Denise felt something shift inside her chest. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "And you think we're ready?" "I think," James said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I'd like to find out." Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade, painting everything golden, and for the first time in months, Denise wasn't thinking about what came next. 3 weeks into whatever this was becoming, Denise realized James lived like it was still 2005. She discovered this on a Tuesday morning when she tried to tag him in an Instagram story about the sunrise reflecting off the flower shop windows. His username didn't exist. Not suspended, not private, simply non-existent, like he'd never entered the digital world at all. "He doesn't have social media," she told Linny, who was arranging baby's breath for a wedding order, while simultaneously responding to customer DMs on 3 different platforms. "What do you mean he doesn't have social media?" Linny looked up from her phone like Denise had just announced James was actually 3 raccoons in a trench coat. "Everyone has social media. Even my 70-year-old Aunt Meredith has TikTok. I mean, he deleted everything. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of it after his breakdown." Linny set down her phone with the gravity of someone placing a weapon on a table. "Honey, that's either very healthy or very concerning, and I'm not sure which." "It's not concerning," Denise said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "It's intentional." He said social media made him feel like he was performing his life instead of living it. "Okay, I can respect that philosophy, but how does he promote his work? How do clients find him? How does he stay connected to the world?" These were exactly the questions that had been nagging at Denise for the past week. Her business lived and breathed through Instagram posts, Facebook Marketplace, and WhatsApp orders. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, comments, and messages from customers. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was also how she survived. "He gets most of his work through word of mouth and a simple website," Denise explained. "Says it's more authentic that way." "And what happens when you want to share something beautiful with him, like a sunset or a funny meme or—" Linny gestured around the flower shop, which was particularly stunning that morning, with light streaming through mason jars filled with wildflowers. "This. What happens when you want to share your world with him in real time?" The question hit harder than it should have. Denise loved capturing moments. The way morning light hit a particular arrangement, a customer's face when they saw their perfect bouquet, the organized chaos of her workspace. Sharing these glimpses felt like sharing pieces of her heart. "We text," she said weakly. "Texting is not the same as living parallel digital lives, and you know it." Their conversation was interrupted by Denise's phone buzzing with a FaceTime call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost declined it until she realized it might be James. He'd mentioned wanting to show her something. She answered, and James's face filled the screen, slightly pixelated from what looked like poor Wi-Fi connection. "Hey," he said, his smile warm even through the digital static. "I'm at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I know you're working, but I thought you might want to see this." He flipped the camera around and Denise's breath caught. Cherry blossoms were in full bloom, creating a canopy of soft pink that looked like something from a fairy tale. The morning light filtered through the petals, casting everything in a dreamy, ethereal glow. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely moved. "I thought about these flowers having conversations, like you mentioned yesterday, about what they might be saying to each other. His voice was soft, thoughtful, and I realized I wanted to have a conversation with you about beauty while I was looking at it. Denise felt her heart do that complicated dance again, even as she noticed Linny watching the interaction with raised eyebrows. I wish I could be there, Denise said. Next time, James replied, I'll text you when I'm going somewhere beautiful. After they hung up, Linny was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. That was actually really sweet. See? But Denise, Linny's voice grew serious. What happens when you want to build something together? A business, a life, a shared presence in the world? What happens when his digital hermit lifestyle bumps up against your very real need to exist online? The question lingered in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. That afternoon, Denise found herself scrolling through her Instagram analytics while waiting for a delivery confirmation. Petals and Purpose had gained 300 new followers in the past month, largely due to her consistent posting and engagement with local hashtags. Orders were up 20% from last quarter. Her digital presence wasn't just vanity, it was survival. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Thank you for letting me share the garden with you today. It felt like having you there. She started to type back, then stopped, started again, deleted it. How do you tell someone that their beautiful gesture made you realize how different your worlds really were? How do you explain that you loved his intentionality but feared his isolation? That you admired his digital detox but couldn't afford to follow his example? Instead, she wrote, Thank you for thinking of me. The blossoms were perfect. But as she hit send, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was editing herself again, making her response smaller and safer. That evening, as she locked up the shop and walked to the subway, Denise found herself looking at the world through two different lenses. James's eyes, which sought beauty and meaning in unfiltered moments, and her own, which instinctively framed everything for potential content. A couple sharing pizza on a park bench. Would this make a good love is in the air post for Valentine's season? An elderly woman feeding pigeons despite the signs. Sweet moment. But would her followers engage with it? Street art blooming across a brick wall. Gorgeous, but would it align with her brand aesthetic? When had she started living her life in captions and hashtags? And more importantly, could she stop? Her phone buzzed with another notification, and for the first time in months, she didn't immediately check it. Instead, she looked up at the sky, noting how the early evening light turned the ordinary street into something quietly magical. No camera, no filter, no caption, just the moment, imperfect and real and hers. The panic attack hit on a Thursday, right in the middle of the lunch rush. Denise was juggling 3 different customer conversations, one in person, one on Instagram DM, and one via WhatsApp, when her chest suddenly felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around her ribs. Her vision blurred at the edges, and the cheerful noise of the flower shop became overwhelming static. "Linny?" she managed to whisper, but her best friend was already moving, guiding her to the back office with practiced efficiency. "Breathe with me," Linny said, her voice calm and steady. 4 counts in, hold for 4, out for 6. You've got this. 20 minutes later, Denise sat in the office chair with a cup of chamomile tea, feeling wrung out and embarrassed. Through the partially open door, she could hear Linny charming customers and handling the afternoon rush with her usual blend of sass and professionalism. Her phone sat on the desk beside her, screen dark for once. She'd turned off all notifications during the panic attack, and the silence felt both peaceful and terrifying. A soft knock on the door frame made her look up. James stood there, holding a small potted succulent and wearing an expression of gentle concern. "Linny texted me," he said simply. "She said you might want some company." Denise felt a complicated mix of gratitude and mortification. "She shouldn't have bothered you. I'm fine." "Are you?" James stepped into the small office, setting the succulent on her desk. "Because it's okay if you're not." The simple acceptance in his voice almost undid her again. She was so used to having to perform strength, to bounce back quickly from her anxiety episodes, to minimize their impact on everyone around her. "I had a panic attack," she said quietly. "They happen sometimes when I get overwhelmed." James pulled up the extra chair, an old wooden thing that creaked under his weight. What triggered it? Everything. The notifications, the customers trying to manage 3 conversations at once, while arranging flowers and thinking about inventory and worrying about the rent payment that's due next week, and she stopped, realizing how frantic she sounded even describing it. "That sounds exhausting." "It's my life." The words came out more defensive than she intended. Does it have to be? The question hung between them like a challenge. Denise felt her shoulders tense. Easy for you to say. You get to live in your peaceful bubble, disconnected from the world. Some of us don't have that luxury. As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. James's expression shifted, not angry, but hurt in a way that made her stomach clench. You think I'm disconnected? His voice was quiet, careful. I think you're privileged enough to opt out of the systems the rest of us need to survive in. The silence that followed felt heavy and wrong. Through the door they could hear Linny laughing with a customer, the ordinary sounds of business continuing, despite the tension crackling in the small office. James was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes focused on the succulent he'd brought. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. You're right about the privilege, he said. I have enough savings from my agency days that I can afford to be selective about work. I can choose clients who align with my values, instead of taking every job that comes along. He looked up at her. But disconnected. Denise, I spend my days illustrating other people's stories. I read constantly. I walk through neighborhoods and really see them. I have conversations with strangers in coffee shops. I volunteer at the literacy center every Tuesday evening. Denise felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't know about the volunteering. Because we've been talking for 3 weeks and there's still so much we don't know about each other. His tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. But I'm not hiding from the world. I'm just engaging with it differently than you do. I don't know how to engage differently. The admission felt like stripping off armor. My business depends on constant visibility. If I stop posting, stop responding, stop being available, I lose customers, I lose income, I lose everything I've built. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking if there might be a way to do it that doesn't leave you collapsed in your office. Before Denise could respond, Linny knocked on the doorframe. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but we've got Mrs. Hendricks here for her weekly arrangement, and she specifically asked for Denise. Something about wanting to discuss her daughter's wedding flowers. Denise started to stand, but James caught her hand gently. What if I helped, he said. Not with the social media stuff. I know that's not my strength. But what if I handled some of the logistics, inventory, delivery scheduling, the business side that doesn't require being online? Linny's eyebrows shot up with interest, but she stayed quiet. You don't know anything about running a flower shop, Denise said. No, but I know about running a small business, and I know about organization and systems. He squeezed her hand. And I know about wanting to support someone I care about. The words someone I care about hit her like a gentle punch to the chest. Why would you want to do that? James smiled, and for the first time that afternoon, it reached his eyes. Because maybe the answer isn't choosing between your world and mine. Maybe it's building something new together. Mrs. Hendricks's voice drifted from the front of the shop, growing slightly impatient. Think about it, James said, standing. No pressure. Just think about it. After he left, Denise sat in the quiet office for another moment before rejoining Linny and Mrs. Hendricks, but as she discussed hydrangeas and baby's breath, part of her mind kept circling back to James's offer, building something new together. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. What would that even look like? And more importantly, was she brave enough to find out? 2 weeks later, James showed up at Petals and Purpose with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and the kind of determined expression usually reserved for people about to reorganize someone's entire life. You're serious about this, Denise said, watching him survey her stockroom like a general planning a campaign. Dead serious? He made a note on his clipboard. When's the last time you did a proper inventory count? Denise and Linny exchanged a look. Define proper, Linny said carefully. Complete, systematic, with actual numbers instead of... James gestured at the handwritten sticky notes covering various surfaces. Whatever organizational system this is supposed to be. Hey, Denise protested, that system has worked for 3 years. Has it, though? James turned to face her, his expression gentle but direct. Because from what I can see, you're spending more time looking for supplies than actually arranging flowers. And that stress? That's part of what's feeding the anxiety. He wasn't wrong. Denise had spent 20 minutes that morning searching for the floral foam she knew she'd ordered, only to find it buried behind a box of vases that should have been in the front display area. Fine, she said, but I'm not changing my entire workflow for some theoretical efficiency improvement. I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm asking you to let me handle the parts that are draining your energy without adding value. Linny perched on a stool, clearly enjoying the dynamic. I like him, she announced. He talks like a consultant, but he's actually trying to help instead of just billing hours. Linny, Denise warned. What? I'm just saying, most men who want to help with a woman's business end up trying to take it over. This one brought his own clipboard and asked permission first. James looked between them, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Should I be concerned that clipboard ownership is apparently a green flag? In our experience? Linny grinned. Absolutely. Over the next few hours, James methodically worked through the stockroom while Denise handled customers and Linny managed the social media accounts. It was strange having someone else in her space, touching her supplies, reorganizing her chaos, but it was also nice, like having an extra set of hands that actually understood what she was trying to accomplish. How do you know so much about inventory systems? Denise asked during a lull, watching James create neat labels for storage bins. My dad owned a small bookstore when I was growing up. Spent most of my summers helping him organize stock and learning that creative businesses still need boring business fundamentals to survive. What happened to the bookstore? James paused in his labeling. Amazon happened. Dad held on as long as he could, but he shrugged. That's part of why I went into design, figured if I couldn't save physical books, at least I could make them beautiful. There was something in his voice. Loss, maybe, or old guilt. Denise found herself wanting to comfort him the way he'd comforted her during her panic attack. I'm sorry, she said quietly. It's not your fault. No, but it still hurts. Losing something your family built. James looked up from his label maker, and there was gratitude in his expression. Yeah, it does. The afternoon flew by in a way that surprised all of them. James's systematic approach to organization was oddly soothing, and Denise found herself actually enjoying the process of creating order from chaos. When customers came in, James would fade into the background, letting her work her magic with arrangements, while he continued his methodical sorting. You know, Linny said around 4 o'clock, I haven't seen you check your phone in 2 hours. Denise looked down, surprised to realize her friend was right. Her phone sat on the counter, notifications silenced, while she focused entirely on the present moment. Huh, she said. Good huh or bad huh? James asked, looking up from a box of ribbon he was organizing by color and width. I'm not sure yet. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally, she'd answer immediately. It could be a potential customer, an urgent delivery request, someone who'd seen her Instagram and wanted to place an order, but something made her hesitate. You don't have to answer that, James said gently. Whatever it is, it can wait 5 minutes. What if it's important? What if it's not? The phone stopped ringing, then started again. Same number. Okay, that might actually be important, Linny said. Denise answered. Petals and Purpose, this is Denise. Ms. Carter, this is David Chen from Bloom & Company. We spoke briefly at the Small Business Expo last month. Denise's stomach dropped. Bloom & Company was one of the largest floral design companies in New York, known for handling celebrity weddings and corporate accounts worth more than her entire annual revenue. Mr. Chen, yes, I remember. I have a proposition for you. Could we schedule a time to talk this week? I think you'll find it very interesting. After she hung up, the shop felt strangely quiet. What was that about? Linny asked. I'm not sure. But David Chen doesn't call small flower shops unless he wants something big. James had stopped organizing and was watching her with careful attention. How do you feel about that? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of things. How did she feel? Excited, terrified, both? I feel like I should be more excited than I am, she said honestly. Why aren't you? Denise looked around the shop, at Linny arranging snapdragons with her tongue poking out in concentration, at James surrounded by the neat piles of supplies he'd spent the day organizing, at the afternoon light streaming through windows she'd cleaned herself that morning. Because this is mine, she said quietly. Messy and chaotic and overwhelming as it is, this is mine. And I'm not sure I'm ready to let someone else decide what it becomes. James smiled, and there was something proud in his expression. Then don't. It might be a really good offer. It might be. But you don't have to make any decisions today. You can listen, think, discuss it with people you trust. He gestured to include Linny. You can take your time. Taking time. What a revolutionary concept. Will you come with me? The words slipped out before she could stop them. To the meeting, I mean. If I decide to take it. Are you sure? I'm not exactly a business expert. No, but you're... Denise paused, searching for the right words. You're someone who sees things clearly. Someone who asks good questions. Someone I trust. The admission hung in the air between them, bigger than inventory systems and phone calls and business propositions. James reached across the space between them and took her hand, careful and deliberate as always. I'd be honored, he said. And for the first time since her phone rang, Denise felt ready for whatever came next. The Bloom & Company offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, all polished marble and designer lighting that made Denise feel like she'd accidentally wandered into someone else's life. James squeezed her hand as they waited in the reception area, surrounded by floral arrangements that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything here screamed success, sophistication, the kind of business empire she'd only dreamed about building. "You don't have to prove anything to these people," he murmured, his voice just for her. "I know." But her palms were sweating anyway. David Chen appeared precisely at 2 o'clock, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Tailored suit, perfect hair, smile that revealed thousands of dollars in dental work. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe early 40s, with the kind of confident energy that came from never having worried about making rent. "Denise, so wonderful to see you again." His handshake was firm, practiced. "And you must be James, David Chen, VP of Acquisitions." "Nice to meet you," James replied, his own handshake equally firm but somehow more genuine. David led them through a maze of glass-walled conference rooms to his office, which overlooked Central Park, and probably came with a mortgage payment larger than most people's salaries. "Coffee, water. We have an excellent espresso machine," David offered, settling behind a desk that looked like it belonged in the Museum of Modern Art. "I'm fine," Denise said, though her mouth felt like sandpaper. James declined as well, and David dove straight into business with the efficiency of someone who billed by the minute. "Denise, I'll be direct. We've been watching Petals and Purpose for the past year. Your Instagram presence is impressive, your customer reviews are outstanding, and your aesthetic aligns perfectly with our brand vision for authentic, neighborhood-focused floral design. Watching us." The words came out sharper than Denise intended. "Monitoring the market," David clarified smoothly. "It's what we do. And what we've seen is a business with incredible potential that's being held back by scale limitations." He opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the desk. "We'd like to acquire Petals and Purpose and integrate it into our Brooklyn expansion plan. You'd retain creative control over the neighborhood location, but you'd have access to our supply chains, our corporate accounts, our marketing infrastructure." Denise stared at the papers without really seeing them. The numbers swimming in front of her eyes were bigger than she'd dared imagine, enough to pay off her student loans, buy actual health insurance, maybe even afford a real apartment instead of the studio above the shop. "What would happen to Linny?" she heard herself ask. "Your business partner would be welcome to join our team, of course. We believe in retaining talent." "She's not my business partner. She's my best friend who helps with marketing." Something flickered across David's face. Surprise, maybe, or mild confusion at the distinction. James leaned forward slightly. "What does creative control actually mean in practical terms?" David's smile remained perfect, but his eyes shifted to James with the kind of assessment Denise recognized from men who weren't used to being questioned. "It means Denise would continue to create the beautiful arrangements that have made Petals and Purpose so special, while we handle the business operations that, frankly, most artists find tedious anyway." "Artists," James repeated, and there was something in his tone that made Denise look at him sharply. "Well, yes, Denise is clearly talented, but talent without proper business infrastructure is just expensive hobby." The words hit like a slap. Denise felt her chest tighten, not with anxiety this time, but with something that might have been anger. "Expensive hobby," she said slowly. "I don't mean to diminish what you've built," David backpedaled quickly. "But look around, Denise. This is what real success looks like. We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than a single flower shop in Brooklyn. And if I wanted to make changes to the arrangements, try new styles, work with different suppliers, well, we'd discuss those decisions as a team, of course. Our brand standards are quite comprehensive." James was very still beside her, the kind of stillness that meant he was thinking hard and not liking his conclusions. "How many other small businesses have you acquired in the past year?" James asked. "Several. It's a very successful model." "And how many of the original owners are still actively involved in day-to-day operations?" David's pause was barely perceptible, but Denise caught it. "Business evolution is natural. Most founders find they prefer to focus on the creative aspects, while we handle the operational complexities." "Most founders," James said, "or most former founders." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I'm not sure what you're implying," David said, his smile becoming more strained. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions about what happens to the people who built the businesses you acquire." Denise looked between the two men, feeling like she was watching a chess match where she didn't understand the rules, but could sense the stakes were higher than anyone was saying. "Perhaps we should focus on the opportunity at hand," David said, redirecting his attention to Denise. "This offer won't be available indefinitely. The market is moving quickly and hesitation can be costly." There it was, the pressure, subtle but unmistakable. Sign now or risk being left behind. Denise thought about her morning routine, unlocking the shop before dawn, the smell of fresh flowers mixing with coffee from the bodega next door, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Friday for yellow roses because they reminded her of her late husband's garden. About teenage couples pooling their allowance money for prom corsages. About the way Linny could make anyone laugh while explaining the difference between baby's breath and Queen Anne's lace. "I need time to think," she said. David's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, but as I mentioned, this opportunity is time-sensitive. Could we schedule a follow-up for next week?" "I'll call you," Denise said, standing up. "Thank you for your time." Outside on the street, James was quiet until they reached the subway entrance. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Denise stopped walking and really considered the question. How was she feeling? "Like someone just offered to buy my soul, and I'm supposed to be grateful for the price," she said finally. James smiled and there was relief in it. "Good. That's exactly how you should feel. Is it crazy to turn down that much money? Is it crazy to want to keep ownership of your own life?" They descended into the subway together, and as the train carried them back to Brooklyn, Denise found herself thinking not about the numbers on David's offer, but about the way he'd called her business an expensive hobby. Some things, she was beginning to realize, weren't for sale at any price. The question was whether she was brave enough to bet on herself instead of taking the safe money. Time would tell. Denise hadn't slept in 3 days. She lay in her small apartment above the flower shop, staring at the ceiling and listening to the pre-dawn sounds of Brooklyn waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, the coffee shop next door grinding their first batch of beans, someone's alarm clock going off in the building across the street. The Bloom & Company contract sat on her kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. She'd read it 17 times, each pass revealing new clauses that made her stomach clench. Creative input subject to brand approval, inventory decisions managed by corporate procurement, marketing strategies developed by central team, death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one chipping away at everything that made Petals and Purpose hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Couldn't sleep either. Want company?" Before she could overthink it, she typed back, "Doors unlocked. Bring coffee." 20 minutes later, James appeared at her apartment door carrying 2 cups from the all-night diner on Atlantic Avenue and wearing the kind of rumpled clothes that suggested he'd been pacing his own floor for hours. "You look like hell," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "You look worse," he replied, settling beside her on the small couch that dominated her living room. "When's the last time you ate something?" Denise tried to remember. "Yesterday? The day before?" Time had become fluid since the meeting with David Chen, marked only by the endless cycle of reading contracts, staring at numbers, and trying to imagine a future she couldn't quite picture. "Linny's been texting me," James said quietly. "She's worried. Linny thinks I should take the offer. What do you think?" Denise pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them like armor. "I think I'm terrified of making the wrong choice. If I take the money, I lose everything that matters about the business. If I don't take it, I might lose the business anyway." "Why would you lose it?" "Because I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is, James. The rent went up again last month. My wholesale supplier is demanding payment up front now, instead of net 30. I had to choose between fixing the air conditioning and buying new display cases, and summer's coming whether I'm ready or not." The words tumbled out like a dam bursting, all the fears she'd been carrying alone finally finding voice. And David was right about one thing. I am just one person trying to run a business that needs 3 people minimum. I handle arrangements, customer service, inventory, marketing, bookkeeping, deliveries. I'm exhausted all the time and it shows in my work. Yesterday, I put together a bridal bouquet that looked like something a high schooler would make for prom. James was quiet, letting her speak. "Maybe expensive hobby is exactly what this is. Maybe I've been kidding myself that I can compete with real businesses." "Stop." James's voice was firm but gentle. "Denise, look at me." She turned to face him, noting the way the early morning light caught the gray in his eyes, the careful way he held himself when he was about to say something important. 3 months ago, you told me that flowers don't lie, that they're honest even when they're dying. Do you remember? She nodded. Your business isn't dying, it's struggling, yes, it's understaffed and undercapitalized, and you're working yourself into the ground trying to do everything alone. But it's not dying. How can you be so sure? Because I've been watching you work for weeks now. I've seen the way customers' faces light up when they see your arrangements. I've watched teenagers count out crumpled dollar bills to buy corsages because they trust you to make something beautiful on their budget. I've seen you stay up until midnight perfecting a sympathy arrangement because you know it might be the last flowers someone brings to their grandmother. Denise felt tears threatening, the kind that came from being seen too clearly. That's not a hobby, expensive or otherwise. That's a calling. Hand callings don't come with guarantees or safety nets or corporate backing. They just come with the choice to keep showing up. What if I'm not strong enough? What if you are? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. James reached across the small space between them and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady around hers. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "When I had my breakdown, when I was sitting in that ER thinking my life was over, you know what scared me most? Not the anxiety or the panic attacks or even losing my job. It was the realization that I'd stopped making choices. I'd been so focused on what I thought I should do, what looked successful from the outside, that I'd forgotten to ask what I actually wanted." "What did you want?" "To matter, to create something meaningful instead of just profitable, to wake up in the morning excited about the work instead of dreading it." He squeezed her hand gently. "To find someone who understood that success isn't always measured in square footage and quarterly reports." Denise felt something shift in her chest, like a knot loosening. "You matter to me," she said quietly. "This matters to me. Even when it's hard, even when I'm scared, this work feels like the most honest thing I've ever done." "Then trust that feeling." "What if I fail? What if you succeed?" Outside, the city was fully awake now. Car horns and construction noise, and the general chaos of 8 million people starting their day. But in her small apartment, with James's hand in hers and the morning light painting everything golden, Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in days. Peace. Not certainty. She still didn't know what she was going to tell David Chen. But peace with the uncertainty, with the risk, with the beautiful terror of betting on herself. "Will you help me?" she asked. "Not with the decision. That has to be mine. But with whatever comes after." James smiled, and there was something in his expression that made her heart do that familiar dance. "Try and stop me," he said. And for the first time in 3 days, Denise felt ready to face whatever came next. Starting with calling David Chen and giving him an answer that would change everything. The phone call lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Denise knew because she watched the timer on her phone screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. As David Chen's voice grew progressively colder on the other end of the line, "I have to say, Denise, this is quite disappointing. We don't typically extend offers like this to businesses of your scale." "I understand," she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "And I appreciate the opportunity, but Petals and Purpose isn't for sale. You're making a mistake. The market is changing, and small operations like yours simply won't survive the next 5 years without proper backing." "Maybe not, but I'd rather fail as myself than succeed as someone else's version of me." The silence that followed felt like victory. After she hung up, Denise sat in the quiet of her shop for a long moment, surrounded by the morning arrangements she'd been working on, when courage finally found her. Sunflowers for Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table, a sympathy spray of white lilies and roses for the Hendricks family, a small birthday bouquet of mixed tulips that a 10-year-old had ordered with his allowance money. Each arrangement told a story. Each one mattered to someone. This was worth fighting for. The door chime announced James's arrival, along with Linny, who was carrying coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained anxiety. "Well?" Linny said without preamble. "Did you call the corporate overlord?" "I told him no." Linny stopped mid-stride, coffee cups frozen in her hands. "You told David Chen no? To all that money? To financial security and health insurance and the chance to never worry about rent again?" "Yes." "Are you insane?" "Probably." Denise looked between her best friend and James, both of whom were staring at her like she'd announced she was joining the circus. "But I'm insane in a way that feels right." James set down his own coffee and crossed the shop to where she stood among her morning creations. "How do you feel?" It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything. "Terrified," Denise said honestly, "and also free, like I just chose myself for the first time in years." "Oh, honey." Linny's expression softened from panic to something that might have been pride. You really did it. You actually chose the hard thing because it was the right thing. I chose the honest thing, Denise corrected. Now, I just have to figure out how to make it work. James was quiet for a moment, studying her face with that careful attention she'd come to love. What if you didn't have to figure it out alone? What do you mean? I mean, what if we made this official? Not just me helping with inventory and organization, but actually partnering with you, bringing the business side of my freelance work into the shop, handling the logistics that drain your energy, maybe even expanding into custom illustration for special events. Denise felt her heart skip several beats. Are you asking to be my business partner? I'm asking to be your life partner, James said quietly. In every way that matters. The words hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful and fragile and full of possibility. Linny made a small squeaking sound and immediately tried to cover it with a cough. James, Denise started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I know it's soon. I know we're still figuring each other out, still learning how to fit our different worlds together. But these past few weeks watching you work, seeing how you care about every customer, every arrangement, every detail, I've never met anyone who puts so much heart into everything they do. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his grey eyes. You asked me once if I believed people could find each other again before they'd ever really met. I think I've been looking for you my whole life without knowing what I was looking for. You're brave and creative and stubborn and kind, and you make me want to be the kind of person who deserves to be part of your story. Denise felt tears building, the good kind that came from being seen completely and loved anyway. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to build something beautiful with you, something that's ours. I'm saying I want to wake up every morning and choose you. Choose this. Choose us. The shop fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic and Linny trying very hard not to cry. We don't even know if we can make this work, Denise whispered. The business? Us? Any of it? We don't, James agreed. But we know we want to try, and sometimes wanting to try is enough to start with. Denise looked around her shop, at the arrangements that told other people's love stories, at Linny dabbing her eyes with a tissue, at James standing among the flowers like he'd always belonged there. For years, she'd been afraid of taking up too much space, of asking for too much, of believing she deserved the kind of love that showed up with clipboards and gentle questions and promises to stay. But maybe it was time to stop being afraid. Maybe it was time to bloom. Yes, she said, and the word felt like opening a door she'd kept locked for too long. Yes to all of it, the partnership, the love, the beautiful uncertainty of building something together. James's smile was like sunrise, warm and golden and full of promise. He kissed her then, soft and careful and complete, while Linny cheered in the background and morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating everything they were brave enough to choose. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with its usual chaos and beauty. Inside Petals and Purpose, three people who'd found each other began planning a future that would be entirely their own. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest, and sometimes that was everything. 18 months later, the morning sun painted Petals and Purpose in shades of gold that Denise had never noticed before she learned to slow down enough to see them. She stood behind the expanded counter, arranging white peonies and dusty Miller for the Henderson wedding, while James worked at his drafting table in the corner they'd converted into his illustration studio. The space had evolved organically over the past year and a half, his art supplies nestled among her flower buckets, his client meetings happening between her delivery runs, their two worlds weaving together like vines finding the same trellis. The shop was busier now, but differently busy. Instead of the frantic energy that used to leave her breathless and anxious, there was a rhythm to their days that felt sustainable, purposeful. James handled the business operations with the same careful attention he brought to his illustrations, while Denise focused on what she loved most, creating beauty that marked the important moments in people's lives. Mrs. Patterson's here for her Friday flowers, Linny called from the front register, where she was ringing up a customer's anniversary arrangement. She specifically requested you handle her order because apparently I lack the proper reverence for yellow roses. She's not wrong, Denise laughed, washing her hands before going to greet their most loyal customer. Mrs. Patterson stood near the front window, examining a display of seasonal blooms with the critical eye of someone who'd been buying flowers for 73 years. She wore her usual Friday outfit, navy cardigan, sensible shoes, and the pearl earrings her late husband had given her for their 40th anniversary. "Denise, dear," she said warmly. "The usual, please, but perhaps a few more stems this week. My granddaughter is visiting from California, and she's always loved yellow roses." "Of course. How is Amanda doing?" "Engaged, finally, to a lovely girl she met in graduate school. They're planning a small ceremony next spring, and Amanda specifically asked if you might consider doing the flowers." Denise felt the familiar flutter of joy that came with being part of love stories. "I'd be honored." As she selected the perfect roses, not too tight in the bud, not too open, but with just the right promise of bloom, Denise thought about how much had changed since that afternoon when she'd chosen courage over comfort. The first 6 months after rejecting David Chen's offer had been brutal. The air conditioning had indeed broken down during the hottest week of summer. A water pipe burst in the back room, destroying nearly $1,000 worth of inventory. There were nights when she'd lain awake, calculating and recalculating numbers, wondering if pride was really worth the constant stress of financial uncertainty. But gradually, things had shifted. James's presence in the shop drew new customers, authors and publishers who needed arrangements for book launches, artists who commissioned custom work for gallery openings. His systematic approach to inventory and scheduling freed up mental energy she didn't realize she'd been spending. Most importantly, his steady presence reminded her daily that she didn't have to carry everything alone. Linny had officially become a full partner 6 months ago, bringing her marketing genius and natural charm to bear on growing their social media presence in ways that felt authentic rather than performative. She'd also fallen in love with Marcus, the owner of the coffee shop next door, leading to a partnership that brought foot traffic and the constant smell of fresh pastries into their space. "There," Denise said, presenting Mrs. Patterson with a bouquet that somehow captured the essence of sunshine and grandmotherly love in 12 perfect roses. "Give Amanda my congratulations." "I will, dear." "And Denise?" Mrs. Patterson leaned in conspiratorially. "That young man of yours is doing something interesting in the back corner. Thought you should know." Denise followed her gaze to where James appeared to be arranging something behind a makeshift screen of tall display plants. He'd been mysteriously busy all morning, claiming he was working on a surprise client project that required absolute secrecy. After Mrs. Patterson left, Denise approached James's corner with the curiosity of someone who'd learned that his surprises were always worth the wait. "James Walker," she said, adopting her most authoritative voice. "What are you up to?" "Come see," he said, stepping aside to reveal what he'd been working on. It was a reading nook, a small perfect space with a comfortable chair, a side table, and shelves lined with books about flowers, art, and love stories. But it was the details that made her heart stop. Fairy lights strung overhead like captured stars, a small vase holding a single yellow tulip, and a hand-lettered sign that read, "For quiet moments and beautiful thoughts." "You made this for me?" she whispered. "I made this for us. I know how much you miss reading, how you used to lose yourself in books before the business consumed all your quiet time. I thought maybe if you had a dedicated space, a place that was just for rest and reflection." Denise sank into the chair, which was exactly the right height and softness, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light from the front windows. On the side table, she found a small wrapped package. "There's more? Open it." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages cream-colored and blank, waiting for whatever she wanted to fill them with. The cover was embossed with a simple design, a single flower with roots that became words, words that became wings. "For your thoughts, your dreams, your plans," James said softly. "For whatever you want to remember or imagine or figure out." Denise opened the journal to find an inscription on the first page. "For Denise, who taught me that the most beautiful things grow from choosing love over fear every single day. J." The tears came without warning. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears that came from being seen and loved so completely. "I love you," she said, looking up at him through her tears. "I love you for seeing what I need before I know I need it. I love you for building things with your hands and your heart. I love you for choosing this messy, uncertain, beautiful life with me." James knelt beside the chair, taking her hands in his. "I have one more thing." "James, you don't need to—" "Actually, I do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made her heart stop entirely. "Because I want to choose this life with you every day for the rest of our lives. I want to build a business and a home and a family and whatever else we can dream up together." He opened the box to reveal a ring that was nothing like what she might have expected, and everything she never knew she wanted. A vintage setting with a central stone surrounded by smaller diamonds arranged like petals, delicate and strong, and absolutely perfect. "Denise Elaine Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and support you and argue with you about flower arrangements for the next 60 years or so?" The yes came from somewhere deeper than thought, from the place where her heart had been quietly saying, "This one, this person, this love," for months. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, absolutely, yes." The ring fit perfectly, of course, because James was the kind of person who noticed everything, including her jewelry size. As he slipped it onto her finger, Denise heard cheering from the front of the shop and realized that Linny and Marcus had been watching the entire proposal from behind the counter. "About time," Linny called out, appearing with champagne that she'd apparently been hiding in the office refrigerator. "I've been planning this celebration for months." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations from customers, impromptu champagne toasts, and the surreal happiness of knowing that her life had just shifted into something even more beautiful than she'd dared to imagine. As evening approached and they finally closed the shop, Denise found herself in her reading nook with her new journal, trying to capture the feeling of a day when everything changed and everything stayed exactly the same. She wrote about the morning light and Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter and the way James's eyes had looked when she said yes. She wrote about Linny's tears and the taste of champagne and the weight of the ring on her finger. She wrote about the flowers that had brought them together and the love that would carry them forward. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with its endless stories of people falling in love, falling apart, falling together again. Inside, Petals and Purpose, two people who had found each other across their broken places, sat surrounded by the beauty they were building together. James at his drafting table, sketching ideas for wedding invitations that would incorporate both flowers and literary quotes. Denise in her reading nook, writing in her journal about the extraordinary magic of ordinary moments, both of them exactly where they belonged. The flowers around them seemed to whisper approval, roses and tulips and baby's breath, all nodding in the gentle breeze from the air conditioning that had finally been fixed properly. Some love stories, Denise wrote in her journal, start with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Others begin with a simple question, asked by someone brave enough to believe in possibility. She looked up at James, who was watching her write with the same careful attention he brought to everything he loved. Some love stories, she continued writing, grow slowly and carefully like flowers tended by patient hands, and some love stories, the very best ones, bloom exactly when and how they're meant to, in their own time, in their own way, beautiful beyond anything that could have been planned. This, she realized, was that kind of love story, the kind that would keep growing, season after season, year after year, as long as they kept choosing each other and the beautiful uncertainty of loving someone completely. She closed the journal and smiled at her fiancé, her partner in business and life and all the adventures yet to come. Outside, the sun was setting over Brooklyn, painting everything golden once again. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. The end. Thank you for following Denise and James's journey. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. What did you learn from this story? Have you ever had to choose between security and authenticity? Would you have made the same choices they did? Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.